I am not going anywhere. That's the message President Biden is defiantly telling Americans as he vows not to drop out of the 2024 presidential race. This week, the president sent a letter to House Democrats urging lawmakers to back him in the election, and also made an unexpected phone call into MSNBC's Morning Joe, daring other Democrats to run against him at the convention. The president continues to face pressure from lawmakers inside of his party to step aside, but Biden has made it clear, saying he won't back down. With a growing number of lawmakers inside the party turning on the president and Americans questioning his ability to lead after a disastrous debate performance, could there be a new presidential frontrunner going up against Trump this November? It's time to go on the record with Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science from Decision Desk HQ. Scott, as always, thank you for joining me. The president hit out this week against what he called big names and elites in the Democratic Party who are calling for him to step aside. Who is he specifically referencing, and aren't they the same people who essentially pushed for him to be the nominee in 2020?
Yeah, and the same people who pretty much cleared the field of Dean Phillips and all the rest in this cycle. I mean, look, if you're on Twitter and you're watching a lot of cable news, you're seeing a lot of people, Democratic pundits and commentators talking about how he should step down. You know, we're a couple weeks from the debate, and we're seeing polling among Democratic voters, independent voters, both nationally and the states, that also agree with some of those political elites and pundits.
Biden seems to be taking advice from a very small inner circle, which include his sister Valerie Biden and his wife Jill Biden. They've told the president to hold more unscripted events and appearances. The president has held rallies in North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. What has his message been to voters who are worrying about his mental acuity?
His message has been, right, like, I had a bad night, I'm fine, I beat him once before, I can beat him again. You know, those are good messages. Those are, I shouldn't say good. Those are the messages he's going with. Again, when we look at the polling and we look at what the pundits and commentators think, they're not necessarily convinced that is the right winning message.
You know, I thought we were transported back to 2016 this week because President Biden called into MSNBC's Morning Joe. I say this because President Trump used to call into a number of weekday morning political talk shows, so it felt familiar. But, during that surprise call-in, the president essentially threatened fellow Democrats to run against him, or dared them to run against him. Is there any chance anyone will actually take him up on that? And theoretically, what would they need to do to replace Biden at the Democratic National Convention next month? It seems to be a pretty complicated process.
Yeah, complicated. Look, and this is the political roller coaster. If we were talking a few days ago, I thought it was 50-50 that Biden would be replaced as the nominee. As of a few hours ago, Tuesday, Wednesday, we've got some of these Democratic caucus meetings coming up. It seems like, he solidified his position after that Morning Joe appearance and a strong letter to Congress. Who knows? He may have a press conference later this week and slip and fall, or have a mental breakdown or something like that. Something to bring the news back up. This could all go back and forth, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the only person who can really remove himself as the nominee is Joe Biden. He's going to have to tell his delegates to vote for someone else. The way the DNC and the mechanics work, those delegates, he won fair square in the primary, and on the first ballot, they're going to vote for him. And so if he wants if the Dems want a new nominee, they're going to have to convince Joe Biden to repledge his delegates and open that up, which most likely would go to VP Kamala Harris if it happens.
Yeah, before that meeting with House Democrats today, Congressman Jerry Nadler notably reversed his position. He had initially called on the president to drop off the ticket, and now he's saying the president is going to be a nominee. So definitely a bit of a vibe shift up on Capitol Hill. So Scott, Politico reported this week that the president said he is done talking about that presidential debate during a phone call with his National Finance Committee. Will he be able to move forward and quell discussions on the debate? And what would the impact be if donors stopped financing his 2024 campaign? I mean, look, Biden's going to be asked about this up until Election Day, and if he wins, into his administration, what's the impact of this?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, he can say he doesn't want to talk about the debate, but it's the right of the free press and American voters to question whatever they want. And they've kind of formed an opinion on it. And I don't necessarily know that the news cycles after the debate is so great for him. We're talking about how many doctor visits he had from a potentially a Parkinson's specialist that's still kind of out there and floating around. They're going to start talking about why is he not doing more events or why is he not taking questions. I don't think the post-debate questioning or derivatives of the post-debate questioning are going to go away. And then about 2 months from now, we're going to have another debate. So this is not something he's going to be able to get away from talking about. And conversely, as you mentioned with the donors have questions about it, right? Like donors are transactional. They're going to give money because they're getting something, they're getting some messaging and hope and chance of winning from the candidate. And so they're going to ask him that question. And I'm reading the same thing you are. The donors are worried about investing in this presidential campaign. And some of them are saying, hey, we're going to withhold our support until there's a new nominee. Now, we haven't seen a groundswell of that, but that could certainly change, depending on how President Biden campaigns over the next couple months.
Yeah, Abigail Disney, one of those donors who has said she will withhold funds to Biden and the Democrats unless they pick a new nominee. That's a major name and one to watch. So as Democrats continue to discuss potential alternatives to Biden, like we've said, he has said he is not dropping out. Is there any new polling showing that someone else could beat Trump? I understand there was some polling last week that showed Kamala Harris was polling a little better than expected against Trump, but he was still beating her.
Yeah, look, there's not a lot of polling, head-to-head polling in Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump, and even less in individual battleground states when it matters. And that's probably because she's not the top of the ticket. There's not a lot of reason to do a lot of polling on her. So if she were to swap out in the first couple weeks, I think the initial polling everyone would look at would be her behind. Now, she would have the advantage of a full war chest and the ability to campaign and not have to answer about a debate or her health. So she would have an opportunity to move those numbers up. But certainly right out of the gate, she would not be starting in a better position or a much better position, if that, than Joe Biden is right now, which is behind Donald Trump.
Biden has struggled to appeal to progressives in his party. What are progressives saying about his debate performance and the concerns over his age? I understand that Pramila Jayapal and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have come out in support of Biden. That's certainly good news for him, right?
Yeah, you saw that AOC statement. Didn't you have to read it twice to make sure it wasn't fake?
Yeah.
This is the same AOC who a couple of years ago said, hey, if we were in Europe, I wouldn't even be in the same party as Joe Biden. This is the same AOC who, spent the last 4 or 5 months going right on the edge and maybe a little bit over it, heavily criticizing the president on his stance in Israel. So that statement was very helpful to him because everyone was looking at the squad and those progressives as the one to lead the charge for a replacement, especially for VP Harris. So that was a good shore up for him this week. But we'll see if it holds. I mean, it's just as quickly as these members of Congress and the Senate have an opinion, they are looking at their own seats and their own majorities. And everyone, all of them are looking out for their own self-interest there.
Scott, President Trump or former President Trump has been doing something a little different. He's been staying more quiet than usual. He gave an interview to Fox News' Sean Hannity on Monday night and talked a little bit about what he thinks is going to happen. But in general, he and his campaign have been quite disciplined with their messaging. What is the impact of that?
The impact is he's letting Joe Biden's campaign have to deal and the presidency have to deal with the aftermath of the debate. Donald Trump was, for the last 10 years or so, has been very, very good at owning the political news cycle and moving from one news cycle to another. This level of discipline we've seen for the last 2 weeks is not something I've ever seen before. And I'm quite surprised he's able to do it. I imagine, next week when we get to the RNC convention and there's a VP nomination on his side, he's probably going to retake it a little bit. But this level of discipline in this campaign is certainly not something we saw in his 2016 campaign or his 2020 campaign.
So sticking with Republicans, this week the Republican National Committee panel passed a draft party platform that greatly shifted the GOP stance on abortion, aligning more closely with President Trump's messaging on the issue. Will we see Republicans line up behind this new platform, or is this, just a push for the presidential race? I thought it was interesting that former Vice President Mike Pence pushed back a bit on this.
Yeah, look, the party platform votes, both for the DNC and RNC, are largely very insider affairs, and it's a document that most people don't read. A couple news stories on it, those types of things. So, on one hand, it is, as you point out, it is a political angle that they are softening up because they want everything, everything they can to soften up for the middle. But on the other hand, a few hundred delegates, a few thousand delegates are going to approve it next week. At the larger convention, and then the document, everyone's going to forget what drawer they put it in. So on one hand, it matters for this week's news story, but I don't know necessarily that it's going to matter a few months from now, other than the Trump campaign has removed some of those more contentious party platforms around abortion and women's reproductive rights that they don't necessarily want to have to answer questions on. They can just say, look, we softened it up. That's our stance now.
So speaking of the RNC, Scott, in just a few days, the Republican National Convention will kick off in Milwaukee. Trump has previously said he will announce his VP pick during the convention. What else can we expect to see come out of the convention?
You know what? Probably the VP pick is the only thing that anyone is really going to care about. I guess, everyone's surprised to learn it's like 4 nights of events, all that kind of stuff. So I think that'll be the biggest thing. There will be some speeches by some people up on stage in prime time that are going to make some waves that we are going to be talking about there, because this is the place where the next 2028 candidates, the next wannabe governors, senators, congressmen, congresswomen want to make a speech so they can make their mark in front of the core Republican audience here. So I would imagine that we're going to see some how do I put it, some flashy speeches that we're going to want to talk about. But other than the VP pick, that's pretty much it coming out next week, and that's all they want. They want it focused on the VP pick and how they're going to win in November.
Scott Tranter, as always, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.